What day is it? What time is it? Where am I? Who am I? How the hell am I going to cope once I finally get released from this prison cell? Never fear, Anxiety Advice Support Person is here. Today I'm going to be talking about how to deal with anxiety both during and after lockdown, but also generally in terms of the pandemic, with some things to help you think about how to look after yourself and also how to set yourself up for success as we slowly move out of all of this throughout 2021. Here comes the intro and then let's talk. Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About Mental Health TV. I'm Jeremy Godwin. Thank you so much for joining me. This week I'm talking about dealing with anxiety during and after lockdown and with the pandemic in general, and also thinking about some things that you need to look at while spending a massive amount of time at home, especially for people who are now working from home semi-permanently or permanently. So there's a few things that I'm going to talk about, and then I'm also going to give some general advice for you to consider post-pandemic and post-lockdown. So let's be frank, this is going to take a goodly amount of time for us to get out of it. Goodly? Am I from the 18th century? Anyway, I don't know where that came from. So this is going to take a good amount of time for us to work our way through. It's fantastic that there are vaccinations for COVID, but of course, every country is going to have delays potentially with that coming out. It could potentially be 1 or 2 years at least until that's been fully rolled out. Here in Australia, we're expecting that the majority of adults will have had their first shot by October. So, it's not going to be a quick overnight fix. And as I've said in previous episodes of both the podcast and this show, we are talking about living with this thing for at least all of 2021, if not into next year. So there are a few things that I really want to consider. And look, this was actually based on some requests from audience members in the UK who are in lockdown number 64 at the moment, which has been dragging on for forever. And I know that everyone is in a different state with this in terms of whether you've got restrictions, whether you're in lockdown, or whether it's just supposedly business as usual. But the reality is that no matter who you are and where you are, we've been affected by the pandemic in one way or the other. So I want to give you some general advice today. So regardless of where you are, whether you're in lockdown or not, you will find this really helpful in terms of both today, but also thinking about what you do to shape your life going forward. So my first tip is take things one day at a time. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not, we tend to focus so much on the future that we forget that life is lived here and now. The past has passed, so we can only learn from it, and the future is unwritten. It is actually created by what you do, say, and feel here in the present. So instead of worrying about how you're going to fill the next week or month, just focus on one day at a time, today. And by the way, that is excellent advice for life, regardless of whether or not you're in a lockdown. And my second piece of advice is to stop counting days. This is good advice for life in general, not just being in lockdown. I know it may seem like a good thing to focus on it being just 90 days to go until you hit a particular milestone or however long it is. But what that does is it subconsciously postpones your joy and happiness until the future. Instead, focus on what you can do each day to enjoy yourself and make the most of this time that you have. Even if make the most of simply means having a bit of fun every single day. It doesn't need to be enormous. It doesn't need to be some massive big celebration for you to have fun. Just watching TV shows that really make you laugh, playing games, chatting with friends over the internet or whatever. There are lots of different things that you can do to have fun. So incorporate that into the day. If you are in lockdown, and also for all of us just dealing with pandemic, let's be honest, you're probably never going to have an opportunity like this again for the rest of your life, or at least until you retire, to spend so much time at home on a regular basis. So make the most of every single day. Again, let me be clear here that I'm not putting pressure on anybody to do anything wild. You don't need to go off and learn 16 languages so that you can argue with yourself in both Swahili and Klingon. But if that's what you want to do, then go for it. Kapla. Tip number 3 is focus on realistic optimism. There really is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I promise you it's not a train. If you focus on realistic optimism, which is the belief that things generally turn out for the best. Yes, bad things happen. Yes, life is a series of ups and downs, but that's what life is. You can't control external events, but if you look at things from the big picture, things are generally better today than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago. I mean, we actually have toilet paper now compared to 200 years ago. So, it's a win there compared to the old days. If you're interested in exploring the topic of realistic optimism further, I would highly encourage you to check out episode 47 of the podcast and also episode 31, which was Mindset. These two episodes in tandem actually really explore the whole concept of mindset and the fact that how you think about things is what shapes your world. So when it comes to optimism, I don't think that you should be like, everything's going to be rainbows and unicorns and woohoo and be a bit delusional. But I do think that it's important to recognize that on the whole, things tend to work out for the best. And that if we focus on being optimistic and being positive about things, generally you will find that you will see more to be positive and optimistic about. If you're going to focus on the negative, then trust me, you will find much more of the negative to focus on. Tip number 4 is choose healthy habits for your mind, body, and spirit. Sure, getting blackout drunk and singing karaoke until 3 a.m. might seem like a good idea, but as well as pissing off your neighbours, you will pay for it the next day with a filthy hangover. And if you do it often enough, it will begin to have a much bigger effect on your overall mental health and well-being. Alcohol is a depressant after all, and it can have a cumulative effect. It's not just alcohol. Unhealthy choices lead to unhealthy outcomes. Look at me. I self-medicated my way through grief and the first 6 months of the pandemic with all the junk food that I could get my hands on, and it sent me into a spiral of anxiety that has taken a lot of hard work to get out of, not to mention the fact that I jiggle way more than I would like to. But I'm working with a therapist so that I can deal with the grief that I was going through from losing a loved one, and also deal with the fact that triggered emotional eating. If you can focus on substituting unhealthy choices for healthy choices, over time you begin to make small steps towards a much more positive outcome. Tip number 5 is focus on good news rather than bad news. In general, the news media is... I was going to say evil, and then I censored myself, but you know what? I'm actually going to say it. Yes, the news media is fairly evil. I think when you manipulate your audiences into feeling really terrible and getting worked up into a frenzy over things, yes, that is evil behavior. So instead, focus on good news. That doesn't mean that you put your head in the sand and just pretend that the world is all magic and joy, because it's not, but you can be aware of what's going on without investing a massive amount of time in it. If you sit there and watch the 24/7 news channels, or if you watch the commercial news networks or read them online all of the time, you're going to end up getting into a spiral of thinking that the world is just negative, 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 and it's not. So actively seek out good news and minimize your exposure to bad news. And then as you come out of lockdown, or just in general, as the world begins to slowly emerge from the pandemic, there are a few things I'd like to encourage you to keep in mind. The first is to take your time and ease yourself into things. Don't feel that you need to rush, and don't feel that you need to go back to normal. I have a real issue with that expression. There was no normal in the first place, and then the other thing there is that you can't actually go backwards. Whatever has happened has changed things irreparably. That's a big word for today. Things have changed, so just take your time and ease yourself into things, and don't feel that you need to rush to go back to 100% capacity, or really when you consider the fact that a lot of people were working 70, 80 hours a week, we're trying to do too much with the limited capacity that we have. The second point is to use this as an opportunity to reassess. And I mentioned before about not rushing back to the way that things were. This is your opportunity to really stop and think about what your life looks like now, and identify what you might not be happy with, what you might not be satisfied with, and make changes. If you want to get off that hamster wheel of work, 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 If you want to get off the social media, look at me and I'm trying to keep up with everybody else hamster wheel, if you want to get yourself out of a situation, now is the time to do it. The best time to do that was yesterday. The second best time is today. You are in control. So use this as an opportunity to reassess. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. Point number 3 is to revisit your priorities and make them the foundation of what you do and what you choose not to do. In the early days of the pandemic, when everything went to shit and we didn't know what the hell was going on and whether or not it was about to trigger a zombie apocalypse, or at least, whether or not we were going to have any toilet paper, the first thing that most of us did was actually to get in touch with our loved ones, be that close friends, family, partner, whatever, and make sure that those people were okay. If that's the case, then that is telling you what your priorities are. Think about that carefully. Think about what genuinely matters. If we were back to day 1 or day 5 of the pandemic again, and you had to do all of this over again, would you make any different choices? Would you worry about the people that you care about more than you'd worry about how many likes you got on social media? Really think about what genuinely matters and focus on your priorities. And then going forward, make that the absolute foundation of your life. If something doesn't sit within your priorities, get rid of it or change your relationship with it. Check out episode 3 of the Let's Talk About Mental Health podcast, where I go into that in more detail. My next point is to set clear boundaries and stick to them. And this is a continuation of that priorities piece. But you know what? Be very clear about what is important to you, set some boundaries around that stuff, and then actually stick to that. I went through boundaries in extensive detail back in episode 53 of the podcast, so check that out. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or head over to letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/episodes. And point number 5 is let go and grow. Let go of the stuff that no longer serves you and use these experiences over the past 12 months and beyond. Use that to grow. This is an opportunity. I said it before, you will most likely never get an opportunity like this again for the rest of your life, or at least for the next few decades. So you know what? If you don't use this as an opportunity to help you to grow and create a life that makes you feel more satisfied, then what are you doing? Honestly. So, make some decisions and use this as the catalyst to live a life that genuinely makes you feel more satisfied, because you never know what is around the corner. So make the most of every single day. And then my final tip is one that I talk about in pretty much every episode of the podcast. Choose to do no harm, be kind, and give more than you take in all things. How you interact with other people will directly shape your world, because how you treat them determines how they treat you. And then the other piece here is how you treat yourself will also shape your world. If you are harmful to yourself, then you are going to cause issues for yourself. If you are unkind to yourself, then you are going to end up having issues in terms of your self-talk and the way that you feel about yourself and your overall self-esteem. And if you continue to take without investing in your health and your overall well-being, then you are going to cause yourself issues in the future. So I might talk about live for today, but it's also about setting yourself up for success in the future. So be mindful about that and make choices that are in your best interests. What tips do you have for dealing with anxiety both during and after the lockdown and pandemic in general? Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Take care and talk to you next time. For more great content, subscribe to the channel by clicking the logo here. And check out this video that you might like. Catch the weekly podcast every Sunday and find even more content at letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au, along with exclusive daily stuff on social media. Thanks for watching and talk to you next time.